When you get into public office, you expect to be shot at. You don't expect to be falsely indicted. And certainly you don't expect to be convicted of something you didn't do. There's no question in my mind, because of the people who were involved in the investigation, the fact that it was my political opponent's wife, who was the U.S. attorney, that started this investigation, because it was her office that indicted me and convicted me, there is no doubt in my mind that the criminal justice system in 2006 was used to shape the governor's race in Alabama.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall from TPM Media. It's Thursday, June 28th, 2007. That's former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman, and like a lot of people who lose criminal trials, he thinks he was wrongly convicted. But in this case, we think it's possible that he may be onto something, and we think that his corruption trial may in some way be connected to the U.S. Attorney purge scandal. This week, Siegelman has his sentencing hearing. Prosecutors have asked the judge to sentence him to 30 years in prison. The judge says that he's probably going to give Siegelman a sentence of between 8 and 12 years, and the decision could come down as early as today. Now, for a long time, there have been questions about this trial. The Siegelman side has long claimed that this prosecution was part of a Republican vendetta to knock him out of Alabama politics and send him to the slammer for a number of years. Up until quite recently, though, it was pretty much all talk. That was until a woman named Dana Jill Simpson came forward with an affidavit alleging political interference with the prosecution. Now, who is Jill Simpson? She's a longtime Republican lawyer and activist from Alabama. As far as we can tell, she's a credible figure. There's no allegations that have been made against her. She actually worked for Siegelman's opponent back in 2002 when he was running for re-election. And the key part of her affidavit has to do with a conference call that took place the day of the election back in 2002. Here's what she said happened. Now, there are a number of people on this conference call. The key player is a guy named Billy Canary. Now, Canary is a big player in Alabama politics. He's a close associate of Karl Rove. In fact, Canary brought Karl Rove to Alabama in the 90s, where they worked on a series of very contentious, very aggressive elections, and played a fairly big role in turning some of the last seats, judicial seats in Alabama to the Republicans. So Canary and Rove are close associates, good friends. They've worked on a number of campaigns together. Billy Canary is also the husband of one of the two U.S. attorneys in Alabama. That's Laura Canary. So here's what Simpson says happened. She says that on this conference call, again, back to November 2002, Canary said that the two women he referred to as, quote, his girls, this is his wife, one of the U.S. attorneys, and the other U.S. attorney in the state, also a woman, would take care of Siegelman after this election, i.e., take care of him with the prosecution and keep him out of politics. When he was asked whether this would be sufficient, whether they could really take care of him, Canary said he had talked it over with Karl and the Justice Department was on the case. Now let me read for you the key part of the affidavit that Simpson submitted several weeks ago. The first person we'll talk about is Bob Riley. That's the son of Siegelman's opponent back in 2002. And I quote, Rob Riley asked about Siegelman being a problem in the future if they did not go to the press, but he was told by William Bill Canary not to worry about Don Siegelman, that, quote, his girls would take care of him, unquote. And at this time, the election contest needed to be put behind them. A little further down the page, William Bill Canary identified, quote, his girls as Laura Canary, his wife, and Alice Martin, the U.S. attorney for the Middle and Northern Districts of Alabama. Now, here's what it goes on to say. Rob Riley, again, that's the son of the current governor of Alabama, the guy who was running against Siegelman back in 2002. Rob Riley then asked if he was sure these girls could take care of Siegelman, and William Bill Canary told him not to worry, that he'd already gotten it worked out with Karl, and Karl had spoken with the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice was already pursuing Don Siegelman. Now, people make all sorts of accusations when someone's about to get sentenced to prison, but these accusations obviously don't come out of nowhere. There's a context that we know of going back for the last 6 months of the U.S. Attorney purge scandal. We know that what's at the heart of that scandal was Karl Rove and other people at the White House going over to the Justice Department asking that certain people be prosecuted, others not be prosecuted, trying to get some U.S. attorneys fired, other U.S. attorneys not fired. So Simpson doesn't have any direct evidence to back up what she's saying about this call. She does have people who she described this to at the time, but she doesn't have a tape recording of the call or anything like that. So it's basically her word, even though, as I said, she's seems to be a very credible witness. There's no direct evidence. None of the other people on the call have come forward and said that this happened. But again, given what we know about the U.S. Attorney Purge scandal, this is not an incredible accusation. In fact, it sounds very similar to some of the things that we know did happen. Now, it was Canary's wife who originally started the investigation against Siegelman. Siegelman's lawyers eventually forced her to recuse herself because she was married to one of Siegelman's key political opponents. The case was then turned over to a career prosecutor who then took the prosecution on from there. An original indictment was thrown out, and then a second series of indictments were brought, and Siegelman went on trial last year and was acquitted of 25 of 32 counts, obviously convicted of 7. So what do we make of these accusations? Should they make us think that there was a miscarriage of justice here? We really don't know the answer to that yet. The people on the call have all given either non-denial denials or carefully lawyered denials that make it unclear whether they're really denying that this call took place. Karl Rove finally answered a question about this a few days ago, and he said he knew nothing about this phone call. Well, that doesn't mean anything. He doesn't have to know anything about the phone call. The question is whether he was getting the Justice Department to prosecute Don Siegelman. So that's what we have, a credible accusation that goes to the heart of the integrity of this case. The accusation sounds a lot like stuff we know did happen in the rest of the U.S. Attorney Purge scandal. This case is getting a lot of attention in Alabama, and even some national newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, have taken some notice, but it still hasn't gotten much attention, much scrutiny. We think it should get more. I'm Josh Marshall from TPM Media, and we'll talk to you next week.